So, you'd like to get straight on with question marks and exclamation points. Great! Well, let's see what you know first, and then I can decide what you still need to learn. So to get started, I've got 5 short exercises I'd like you to complete. Once you've finished these exercises, I'll have a much better idea of your strengths and weaknesses, and so I'll be able to help you focus on any areas where you need to get certain things straight. So, here's the first exercise. Drag the question mark to the words commonly used to ask questions, and the X to the words that are not. When you've finished, click Done. OK, thank you. Now, try this exercise. Put in the question marks by clicking in the correct places. When you've finished, click Done. OK, thanks. Now this time, I want you to decide which of these sentences requires a question mark and which do not. Drag the question mark to the end of the sentences which you think need them. When you've finished, click Done. OK, thanks. Here's another exercise I'd like you to complete. Drag the exclamation points to the correct places. When you've finished, click Done. Now, finally, drag the exclamation points to the onomatopoeic words which need one and the X to the words which don't. When you've finished, click Done. Lovely, thank you. What that little diagnosis tells me is that we should focus on the sections on my menu here, which are highlighted in blue. You can, of course, click on any section, but these seem to be the sections that you need to focus on most. So let's start with the first highlighted item on the menu. Let's talk now. So let's get going. What's a question mark? Well, to start with, a question mark is that piece of punctuation that looks like this. And what does it do? Well, it is usually placed at the end of sentences to make it clear to the reader that the sentence should be heard as a question rather than a statement. You can normally tell that a question mark is coming because certain words such as why, when, how, who all ask questions. You do not need a question mark and a period. If you look closely, a period is already there. OK. So, certain words are usually associated with questions, but let's see if you can tell which ones. Drag the question mark to the words commonly used to ask questions, and the X to the words that are not. When you've finished, click Done. Yes, well done, that's right. The words and now do not really introduce questions. They're called connectives, which join ideas. All the other words do ask questions and should be written with question marks after them. Well, that's probably enough of this area. Questions which expect immediate answers are called direct questions. You must always put a question mark on the end of direct questions. Where are you going? I'm going out. Are you going to school? No, I'm going to the shops. You can usually tell a direct question because the subject of a sentence, words like you, he, she, is put after the verb instead of before it. So the statement, you are hungry, becomes a direct question by switching the subject and the verb around and putting a question mark on the end. Statement, you are hungry. Question, are you hungry? Now, to see if you understand what I mean about direct questions, try this. Punctuate these sentences correctly by clicking on the spaces where you think the question marks belong. Yes, well done, that's right. Do not think that the question mark comes right at the end of the line every time. This only happens in simple sentences. In speech, it will come after the direct question, inside the direct quotation marks. This may not necessarily be at the end of the line. So let's move on. All right, you've been through the sections in this. One area where you may wonder whether you need to use a question mark or not is with things called indirect questions. The answer is that you do not. But what is an indirect question? Well, they're like reports of questions. Indirect questions are really statements and do not require an answer. Will the computer work is a direct question which requests a direct answer, so you need a question mark. I wondered whether the computer would work, however, is an indirect question. It doesn't require a direct answer, and so you don't need a question mark. The same goes for, she asked if I could hear her. This is an indirect question. It doesn't require a direct answer. The direct question would be, can you hear me? Some people get a bit confused by indirect questions, but one fairly reliable way to tell whether a sentence is an indirect question or not is to see whether it contains words such as if or whether. If it contains either of these words, there's a good chance it's an indirect question and so does not require a question mark. To see if you've grasped this distinction between direct and indirect questions, try this. Drag the question mark to the direct questions and the I to the indirect questions. When you're finished, click Done. Yes, well done, that's correct. Numbers 1 and 2 are indirect questions. They do not require direct answers, and there are actually giveaways within both to help you tell that they are indirect questions. The giveaways are the words if and whether, as these are terms often used when a question is reported. Numbers 3 and 4 are direct questions. They require direct answers, and so they should take question marks. The question marks, furthermore, should come at the end of the sentences. Well, that's probably enough of this area for now. Let's move on. All right, you've been through the sections in this area. Let's go back to the explanation board to see what other sections we can go over. OK, so you want to look into particular punch exercises I'd like you to complete. Once you've finished, let's talk now about exclamation points. What is an exclamation point? Well, at a very basic level, it's a vertical line drawn over a period. But what is it for? Well, it goes at the end of a sentence to show a strong feeling, perhaps surprise, shock or anger. An exclamation point affects the way you say something. For example, the statement, "You don't mean it," becomes, "You don't mean it," once you put an exclamation point at the end. On the whole, you should use exclamation points sparingly. In fact, it is best to use them as little as possible, and then when you do use them, they really count. OK, to see if you understand how and why you use exclamation points, try this. Drag the exclamation points to the correct places in whichever sentences you think need them. When you've finished, click Done. No, I'm afraid you haven't quite got that right. Actually, all these sentences could take exclamation points at the end of the entire sentences. You can tell that they are enthusiastically and emotionally spoken by the use of such words as very and such a. Try this to see if you've now grasped what I'm getting at. Choose whether the sentence uses exclamation points correctly or not. When you've finished, click Done. Yes, well done, that's right. Never use more than one exclamation point, no matter how angry or emotional you want to be in writing. This means that in the first two examples, exclamation points are incorrect. But the other two examples, using one exclamation after each emotional outburst, are both correct. OK, so let's... Another quite common use for exclamation points is in certain short expressions like wow or stop or what a game. Many onomatopoeic words use exclamation points, by which I mean words whose meaning is very like their sound. For example, words like crack and thud sound quite like the concepts they are used to communicate. To see if you understand what I'm getting at here, decide which of these words need an exclamation point. Drag the exclamation point to the onomatopoeic words which need one, and the X to the words which don't. When you've finished, click Done. Yes, well done, that's right. Ouch, crunch and crash are onomatopoeic words, which means the sound of the word and the meaning of the word are very similar. Words like this should always use exclamation points. Read, however, is just a command, so would not usually require an exclamation point.